This is The Feed with Amber Mack and Michael B on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Hello and welcome to The Feed with Amber Mack
and Michael B for everything new now and next.
We have you covered for what's happening in the world of tech and what's trending online.
On the show, we dive into Twitter's new tool to report misinformation.
Plus what Facebook is doing to limit Taliban content around the world.
Also on the show, everything you need to know about a robot that does parkour.
And how to make sure you stay safe online so you're not a victim of cybercrime.
That's all coming up right here on The Feed with Amber Mack and Michael B.
This episode of The Feed is powered by TP-Link. TP-Link routers and technology can remove wireless pain points in your home so you have better performance for working, streaming, and gaming.
Trending up.
Well, Amber, so much news and so little time. How are you, my friend?
I am doing great. I just want you to say parkour again because it's funny coming from you.
Parkour. I don't know why I want it. Sounds like I'm like a mating call or a bird noise. Do you remember Evolution? The movie with David Duchovny, and they're like, caw, and they're calling the pterodactyl, I think it was. So that's what that reminds me of. Parkour. Anywho, that's a little later. We're going to get to it. Lots and lots of news. What are people talking about?
All right. So Twitter, I said it like that now. Now you've infected me. Twitter has introduced a new test feature that allows users to report misinformation they run into on the platform, flagging it as misleading. Thank goodness this happened because I was about to go off on a rant as I did on Twitter, unsurprisingly. So if you wanted to report something on Twitter that included a tweet that had health misinformation or something that was just plain old, fake news about COVID-19 or vaccinations, there was no category to put that in. All they have categories for is hate speech or impersonation. And there's a couple of other things. And it was shocking to me that a platform this big didn't have something that was just like, hey, this is misinformation that could lead to public health issues, right? So it looks as though they have announced that they are going to have now an easy way to report misleading tweets, according to CNN. Now, the feature is available this past Tuesday, to just a small group of users in the US, South Korea, and Australia, because Lord knows those are the only places that suffer from fake news. Anyway, nonetheless.
I was just about to say, are they the most important markets that are spreading the misinformation? Like Australia, down the bottom of the world. I love my country, but I feel like there's a lot of other countries that might need this a little bit quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. Like maybe everywhere. Okay, so I don't even know what to say. I mean, like, why did it take this long? And, I love Twitter. Don't get me wrong. It's my favorite platform. But I went to check out Jack, who, of course, is the one of the founders of Twitter. I don't know his official role, but he's still officially in a role at Twitter, to check out his Twitter stream just to see if he tweets about anything. All he tweets about is cryptocurrency. So I realized like this is not a priority from the top.
You know what? That is enough information people need to understand from the top down. I concur. I think that it's quite alarming to me that it's taken this long, especially when we're so far into a global pandemic. But speaking of labeling content, and obviously Twitter has been following the footsteps of Facebook. Facebook's been following Twitter, depending on who goes first in certain circumstances. Now, Facebook has actually confirmed it will continue. So it has been doing this, but it's going to continue to ban Taliban content from its platforms as it considers the group to be a terrorist organization. Now, this is very interesting to me because obviously then if you flip to the news and you see leaders from around the world and their response and the way they handle it, and then news outlets, and then you go on social and then you see the information that is being populated as well, it is exceptionally contradicting, and it's exceptionally alarming to see what is being spread, and it does, it's quite concerning because we're talking about people's lives here, and it's quite a serious situation.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And the best part about this news headline, which I commend them for, is that they say that they have hired a team of dedicated Afghan experts to monitor and remove content. presumably these are people, and sometimes you need people. So it's not an algorithm to be able to identify this content. It's people with knowledge of the area who speak local languages to be able to give that information some context. So I really like the idea that, again, they recognize that there are roles right now that people, I'm going to keep saying that, people have to play.
But also, what I like that Facebook went one step further, and they've highlighted that the policy applies to all of its platforms. So not just Facebook. So we're also talking about Instagram and WhatsApp. So they really are looking at all accounts. They're trying to see anyone that has accounts on any of these apps that are linked to the group as well. So they're really trying to make a conscious effort to ensure that misinformation and dangerous information isn't being spread.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good move that they're making. And I will just say my only problem with some of these announcements is, why does it take so long? I mean, Afghanistan right now is in such a state of turmoil, and it's incredibly dangerous. And then Facebook comes out with this news now. And then, same thing for Twitter. How long have we had health misinformation? Over 15 months that has impacted whether or not people want to get vaccines. And then they just come out with this. So it's just, these social networks have a huge
Yes, and
role
this
to
just
play.
happened, right? So when
Yeah.
America pulled out of their troops, this toppled and this escalated very quickly. So you're absolutely right. 15 months or more when
Yeah.
we're talking about COVID, but then this, matter of days or weeks.
Yeah, they have to be able to move more quickly on these things. And, presumably they have some of the best tech teams in the world, and they have to be able to respond. This sit and wait is not a good strategy. Okay, quickly, we only have, I don't know, 30 seconds left. Boston Dynamics, their robots, who you may remember Spot the robot dog. They also have a robot that does lots of tricks. Well, the tricks are getting better and better all the time. It looks like a human in a robot costume, and now they can do parkour better than you, according to Engadget.
It's really cool. So check out the video online. It's pretty incredible what they've been able to achieve with the technology. Stay with us when we return. Why cybersecurity crimes are on the rise, and we're going to let you know how you can stay safe.
The Feed with Amber Mack and Michael B. For everything new, now, and next on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167. In the Spotlight.
To help educate all of us to protect ourselves against online risk, we are joined now by cybersecurity expert and director of TELUS Online Security, Lee Tynan, who joins us now to talk about some tips and tricks to ensure that our data and identities are better protected. I should say identity, because most of us will just have one online. Lee, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so first of all, we want to talk a little bit about cybersecurity in general. We know that the threat landscape is increasing, and threats for individuals are on the rise. Let's talk a little bit more about the state of cybersecurity today. What is happening right now, and what's in front of us?
Wow, it's growing exponentially. I know in the first 6 months of the pandemic alone, cybercrime increased by 65%. And when you consider that it's already one of the largest industries in the world, one of the fastest growing, and one of the most profitable, that's a pretty staggering number. And most Canadians are aware it's happening, but very few of us really think it's going to happen to me. It's that kind of head in the sand. It's not going to happen to me, or it's not happening in Canada at the south of the border, or in Europe or Africa. But the data is actually saying otherwise. Canada, third in the world for data records being stolen per capita. And according to a Stats Canada survey in 2020, 42% of Canadians have actually experienced at least one type of a cybersecurity incident since the pandemic began. That's almost half of us. It's like this is a real problem and growing exponentially.
So speaking of that growth, how much of it is the fact that we have seen this, massive explosion when it comes to a digital presence and the amount of time we now spend online, especially now that everything's accelerated from a digitization perspective, and how much of it is actually crime, people growing in the space because they see an opportunity?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. the way the internet usage has gone up exponentially. 9 out of 10 of us is using the internet more than ever before. We are doing things that we've never done before on the internet. We are banking, we are shopping, we are working, we are learning. You name it, we're doing it online. And that increase has opened up new opportunities for cyber criminals. And when you think about our behavior, we are quick to lock up our homes or our vehicles or our personal belongings. But very few of us are actually taking the steps that are needed to protect our online identity. And the part that we need to understand is that every business that we've ever interacted with has a piece of information, has a piece of our information. And so it's not just the things that we are doing personally that put us at risk, but every business we've interacted with, if they get breached, if they are hacked, then our information is shared. And it's that combination of things that creates the intense risk that our information may be bought and sold on the dark web. And for most people, they don't know what the dark web is, but it's anonymous and encrypted area of the internet where cyber criminals buy and sell information. And so in an identity theft situation or in a breach situation, one bad actor steals the information, packages up it in a little bow, and then puts it on the web for sale. Another bad actor comes along and buys it with the intent of committing fraud. And that's where the danger comes. So there's two elements. One, you need to start to understand what breaches have happened and what information is at risk and make sure that you are taking steps to correct that. And two, actually monitoring your credit profile so that you understand when information is now being used to commit identity theft. And that's the part that people don't really understand or aren't taking the steps to really protect. And that's what really needs to change. As we move forward in our new digital world, we need to behave differently.
I think it's interesting too, because I think there is a tendency to kind of shame people and make them feel badly about how they're managing security. And yet at the same time, a lot of people have things like two-factor authentication turned on. They're very careful. They have really strong passwords. But you picked up on something that I think is such a big issue, which is that now we're dealing with so many more services and apps that we're logging into on a regular basis. So you're right. If there's a breach at one of those companies, no matter what we did, it does feel like there is the potential that pretty much anyone could be hacked. So can you talk a little bit about what people can do to protect themselves against this, knowing it's not just one thing?
Absolutely. And I think just building on your point, we disclose all kinds of personal information online, and we often do it for a benefit, right? I think about loyalty programs or, all the apps that we use, right? So every one of those logins or every one of those, companies has a piece of our information. And when you consider the number of logins and passwords that are required, it becomes staggering. And unfortunately, people may be using two-factor identification, but most Canadians are actually recycling between 1 and 3 passwords because the sheer number of apps and logins is overwhelming. We use the same password to try and, keep it all together. And that is one of the greatest vulnerabilities for us. So part of what we need to do is begin to take a bit of a structured approach to how we protect ourselves. We know that 89% of Canadians wish the internet was more secure, yet only 18% are actually doing something about it. And that often the something doesn't mean they're doing everything. It just means they're taking some steps. So what we need to do moving forward is educate ourselves, make sure we are protecting ourselves through multiple layers, right? It's not just one thing. You can't just use a password manager or just use a VPN. You need to kind of think holistically. So having the antivirus, the malware, the device protection, that layer is important. Going beyond that, securing yourself through a VPN. Many people connect over public Wi-Fi, and while public Wi-Fi is wonderful, it is also insecure. And so if you are sharing personal information, that is highly visible to anyone that is trying to find it. So using a VPN, we use it all day for work, and yet many in our personal lives don't give it second thought. So taking that step. Password managers, making sure we have unique and complex passwords per login. And you can't do that just remembering it yourself. You need to use a tool. But then going beyond that, because even if you do those things, exactly as you said, if a business gets hacked, your information is exposed. So you need to take the steps to proactively scan the internet on the dark web for where information has been exposed, and keep a close eye on your credit monitoring. So when information gets stolen, when it starts to get used, they're either opening up credit cards or opening up bank accounts or taking out loans. Your credit, it's an alert. You need to see when that's happening, because you get to then say, hey, stop, that wasn't me. So having that visibility. And then lastly, having the tools that should you become a victim of identity theft, that you're not alone. It is an incredibly time, onerous, emotional, frustrating process for someone to go through alone. So having an expert there to do it for you it's that peace of mind. And then we also offer restoration insurance. So TELUS Online Security has tried to put this together to make it super simple and easy for Canadians to protect themselves.
Lee, just before we let you go, obviously a lot more people are online. Everyone's quite aware and savvy when it comes to, working and online and using the internet. Do you think we're actually past the understanding and we need to look at a cultural shift? Do you think people value access to service far more than their own personal identity from a security perspective?
Hadn't heard it quite said that way, but I actually think you're correct. People don't understand the risks that are really out there. We Canadians are very trusting. We think nothing bad is going to happen, but the reality is it is. And we have to change our behaviors. If you think back when seatbelts were first introduced in, the late 60s, it took something like 10 years for it to become habit for Canadians to use. We can't wait 10 years to gain the awareness and behavior to protect ourselves. We wait 10 years, we've lost our identity, we've had our credit compromised, the consequences are so severe. So we need to drive awareness that this is something that everyone needs to pay attention to do. We need to educate ourselves. We need to start taking steps. Even if you use free services, those are better than doing nothing. And basically 8 out of 10 Canadians are doing nothing. So we need to quickly educate everyone in terms of what's really happening and the steps that they have to take, and hope that people begin to pay more attention. This is not going away. We are never going back to a non-digital world. And so our behaviors have to change. I quite often say that cyber criminals have upped their game, and we have to up our game too.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. This is such an important conversation. Of course, people can find out more about what TELUS does to protect us when it comes to cybersecurity. And thanks so much for your time, Lee.
Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, how to know if you can really afford your next big dream trip.
The Feed with Amber Mack and Michael B. For everything new, now, and next on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167. Apptastic.
All right, it's time now for our favorite part of the show, which is known formally as Apptastic and informally as what's going on in Michael's mind this week. And it looks as though it's all about travel, Michael. So let's start there.
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to start traveling. I'm fully vaccinated. I'm following all the precautions. It's not as bad as people make out. You still have to be very careful. The only thing I'd say is the service is worse, the lines are longer, and I don't see people cleaning. So I don't really see from that side of things, but it is nice to be out and about. People are opening up and doing stuff, and so obviously you're thinking about traveling soon, and you want to know where you can go, what are the best deals, what would work with for you. any recommendations from people that have been there or lived there. This first app, I think, is really, really helpful. And it kind of brings it all in one place. And you can, it's actually called the Elude app. And so it allows you to see the maximum potential of your budget, and then what trips could be available based on that budget that you have to spend.
That is very cool. And I think you're right. A lot of people are starting to think about travel and, it's a big decision to make these days. It's not just about, hey, where you want to go, but also, is it a safe place? Are they following COVID regulations carefully? And of course, can you actually afford to go there? So I love this idea that there is an app now that will be able to help people, basically if you say, presumably to Elude that, $2,000 for a trip, it will give you some ideas about where you can go based on that budget and your interests. And I think a lot of people will love this. There's always this talk about how people have more money now because they've been saving during the pandemic. I think that really just applies to sort of the upper middle class and the mega wealthy. There's still a lot of people who have been hurting during the pandemic.
Don't have enough money. Yeah. So I think that's a really good point. And we've talked about it many times on the show. You and I, we would travel a lot to earn our living. So that's how we're lucky enough to travel. It's not like we're able to just go willy-nilly all over the place, and most people can't. And so it's something that you save up for, you plan for, and it's a big deal and a lot of work and an effort goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next up, let's say that you go on a trip and you come home and someone took care of your cat and you're worried, is my cat happy or did they have a traumatic experience? Michael has an app. Apparently you're living with a cat right now. This is the vibe I'm getting.
I am. I really am. So I actually am looking after a friend's house, and they needed someone to look after their two cats. And so it is interesting to me because one cat has a very distinct, and I didn't really pay attention before, but obviously I do now. One cat has a certain personality and the other one is completely different. And I have no idea what they're saying. I don't know how they feel. It's like, it's crazy to me. I don't know if they're hurt. And so that's how actually I stumbled upon this app. So it's based a Calgary company out of Alberta in Canada, has developed this app. It's called Tably, so like a tabby cat. They're an actual health technology company, an animal health technology company called Sylvester.ai. You can check them out. And basically, it uses the phone's camera to tell whether your cat is feeling pain. And so I thought this was really fascinating. Obviously, there's lots of use cases for this when it comes to your veterinarian. It can help them, or if you think that there's something wrong and you wanted to know. So I thought this was very handy. Of course, I did test it out. The cats seem fine so far.
I love this. So, like you said, this is great, especially if a cat is coming in for any type of appointment at a vet's office and gives them just this added layer of information. And I should say, we always should kind of trust our natural instincts, but I love that there's this other tool that can help as well. So, again, if you want to learn more about this company, it is called Sylvester.ai, and the app itself is called Tably. So, like you said, you point the camera at...
Fun fact, can I just tell you, did you know that cats are very similar? When you look at a dog, you can tell by its tail what kind of mood it's in. Apparently that's the same thing with cats. I didn't know that.
Well, that was really worth interrupting me for. Okay.
I just wanted to share with the world.
All right. So we got that information. I think that probably not a big surprise to cat owners. And we'll have to bug Aaron about that a little bit later, because every time we do these Zoom recordings, there's always a cat who is walking over his computer, I think. Okay. So last up, we want to talk about Dish Story or Dish Story. I don't know how you say it, but Michael, this is the one app out of the list that you sent me this week that I just can't place. You just got to take this and run with it.
So imagine Dish, like cooking, and history. Tori. Dish Tori. Cool, right? So the idea behind this is, when you cook, or like a lot of memories and things that happen in the family throughout your past with your, when you're growing up, and your memory of your grandparents, like mine, for example, my grandma baked a lot and was excellent at it. A lot of memories happen in the kitchen. So, this app is all about capturing those memories. You can record and save and share all these memories through this app that's to do with cooking and all of that stuff that happens in the kitchen.
That is very cool because I think that it's fair to say that most families, you have most of your memories from kind of gathering around the kitchen, and it makes sense to be able to capture some of those moments. So, according to the description on the Google Play Store, so it's available for Android devices as well as iOS devices like iPhones and iPads, is that this is basically an opportunity to kind of share those moments that you're having in the kitchen and record those special memories, whether it's, cooking a meal together or eating a meal together, or if you're like my family playing crib together around the kitchen table. It's a fun thing to be able to preserve those memories. I think a lot of people are probably going to start to do more of this because let's face it, the old photo albums are kind of dying off. I feel like people are going to tweet at me and be like, that's a crazy thing to say, but I don't think people are printing pictures as much. So I love this idea of multimedia memories. And it looks like it also got a lot of great reviews in the App Store.
Yeah, absolutely. And just think about it though. It's like I've asked for recipes before and sometimes it's not written down and or it's different with some liberties when you make it. So it's like you can capture that at the same time as well as just, gathering around having great conversations. So I just thought it was a neat little app. So those three apps again, you've got Allude, for those trips that you might eventually end up taking. And then, of course, Tably, if you want to know how your cat's feeling, and Dish Story. So capturing those memories from and in the kitchen and with your family and friends. So, of course, if you've got an app, gadget, or product you think we should check out, tweet us at AmberMac and at AmBancroft80. And, of course, use the hashtag the feed. Coming up, how one startup is working hard to take the bias out of AI algorithms.
The Feed with Amber Mack and Michael B. For everything new, now, and next on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167. Techstar.
As artificial intelligence increasingly becomes a part of everyday life, who is testing algorithms to make sure they work on and for everybody? It's a very important question. And to Halt, a new startup focused on AI validation and testing. What does that mean? Well, to share more, Param Arabi is the technical co-founder of the startup Halt and is joining us now. Now, Param, this is this is a big question. Obviously, we read lots of headlines about artificial intelligence, how there's bias that seeps into it. So how do you go about preventing bias coming into algorithms from the very start?
Well, we believe the first thing you need to do is to actually measure how much bias there is. And what we found is that often most algorithms do have bias, but unless you don't test and until you actually measure, you really don't know. So measurement is really the key first step to addressing that bias.
So, how do you actually measure that? Because obviously, this is something that companies have been trying to figure out for many, many years. Everybody wants to know if there's bias baked in. So, what is that process?
There are many different ways of that measurement, but what we found works very effectively essentially is we create a second AI that provides different inputs to the AI we're testing. Imagine different kinds of images, different people of different ethnicities, skin tones, hair colors, and measures how well the main AI is performing. And based on where it sees might be deficiencies, it will provide more testing data, more images, and keeps that measurement. And in the end, understands where the AI is doing well and where it actually is making errors. And therefore, it finds the biases that it exhibits.
And so I imagine then that this would be never ending. So the more data you put in, the more you have to sift through and see how correct it is as you pump in all this data, because it's just going to be never ending. Will you have to continue to iterate whether you started in a place where it didn't seem like there was bias? Can it then creep back in later on?
The bias can creep back in, especially if the system is redesigned, but it is never ending. But the first steps get you the biggest gains. For example, you may find that an AI is 20% underperforming on a certain demographic. In a first iteration, that 20% might be reduced to 2%. And then after a few iterations, it might become 0.2%. After some point, we can address bias well enough that we can confidently say this AI is fair. But until we've actually done the test, we often don't know how it may perform.
So, for people who maybe are just starting to learn more about algorithms and bias built in, could you talk a little bit about what some of the most common type of biases are that you're finding and seeing out there? Because of course, this affects all of us in our way of life.
Of course. And one example I'll use is Twitter and the image cropping they use. And so recently, Twitter found out that when someone uploads an image on Twitter, they auto crop it based on where the algorithm feels is the most interesting part of the image. And they found out that actually often it would select people that had white skin, and it would select people that were had different colors of hair. And so they asked us to actually perform a test on Twitter. And when we performed the test, we found out that consistently when people who had were disabled on a wheelchair, people that had very dark skin tone, and people who had white or gray hair, Twitter would automatically crop them out from photos. And we, after repeated tests, we saw that this is actually more than just a statistical anomaly. And so that's one example of what happens, that consistently one demographic is being cropped out from that algorithm from Twitter.
And so for companies hearing about what you do at Halt, how do they go about working with you and long term? What's the value there? Because obviously we would hope as well, there is, a diverse set of team members putting together the technologies at these companies, but we also understand that it's just not possible to cover, every possible, bias that could seep in. So how does this side of things, this audit work, and how does it work long term if a company wanted to work with you?
Well, you're absolutely right that companies are thinking about this, but they don't have often the capability or the team in place to address all kinds of bias. And so that's what the team that we've been building at Halt is really meant to address, not just a few types of bias, but many different kinds of biases. And the way we work with companies is they approach us. We perform a free audit so that we evaluate their AI system. We provide them the result, and they can do this on a one-time basis. They can keep coming back after they've made improvements, which we find is often a good way of measuring how much progress they've made. Well, we provide essentially that measure that they can then check how they're progressing toward the goal that they might initially set.
Just one last question for you, because your business reminds me of businesses out there that exist, but if things get better, you will have to evolve, because presumably we would want to have algorithms that didn't have any bias baked in, and that would be a problem that we would eventually get rid of. So how hopeful are you that maybe in the future there are algorithms that don't have biases built in? Will we ever get there?
I think there will always be some bias. It's impossible to remove bias completely. The question is how much. What we find right now is the amount of bias in most algorithms out there is significant. For example, in one demographic, it may work 90%, but in a different demographic, it might be 50%. So it's a very big difference right now. And over time, I think that difference will become smaller and smaller, and we'll get better at being less biased. But I think in terms of removing bias, that is going to be hard to do in an absolute sense.
How do you ensure that you guys don't end up having bias and keep yourselves in check as well?
That's a very good question. And so we've talked quite a lot about it. And the best answer we have today is that we have a very diverse team. I think the way you approach bias is you make sure you have many different vantage points. So we have on our team people from different walks of life, from different continents, with different people that have different disabilities, different skin tones, different backgrounds, and that is I think one step in trying to reduce our own biased lenses. But I think as we do more of this, we'll probably learn more about how we should evolve. But right now, I think we've taken only one step in that direction.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us today. And if people want to check out the company, they can visit you online at halt.ai. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Up next, if you're looking for a new phone or watch, Michael Josh shares watchmaking headlines from Samsung.
The Feed with Amber Mack and Michael B. For everything new, now, and next on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167. Power Fred.
This is The Feed with Amber Mack and Michael B. Now, Samsung has launched their latest devices in their Flip and Fold series. So to share details on the Galaxy Flip 3, Fold 3, and Watch 4 series, Michael Josh from Gadget Match is joining us now. Michael, this is quite a lot of devices that have been released into the market. So let's just find out and dig in how they stack up. Let's start with the Galaxy Flip 3. What are your thoughts, my friend?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. The Flip 3, I'm pretty excited because, 3 years ago when Samsung launched their first foldable phone, it was really just a piece of tech that only the wealthy and those who were crazy enough to splurge, I think $2,000+ on a phone. Now it's a foldable phone that people can afford, quote unquote. It's about $1,000 US starting price, and they're really aiming it at a generation who wants to kind of have this foldable tech, who's also hip and trendy and fashion forward. That's what the Flip is supposed to be.
Michael, when I was looking at these phones, they look relatively small. Can you talk a little bit about the form factor?
Yeah, they're really small. Think about the Flip 3 as half the size of a phone, like an iPhone. You fold it in half, and that's the size of the Flip, which is great because not everyone has a deep or a big pocket. Sometimes you have a really small tote or handbag. So it's the perfect size if you want a smaller phone. And because you can kind of close it, there are no buttons to press, so to speak, no butt dial happening.
Okay, but so what is fundamentally the biggest difference between the Galaxy Flip 3 and the Fold 3?
So the Flip 3 is basically a phone that you kind of want to fold away, just to make it smaller. There are other things that, you can kind of prop it up and have it work as a phone with a built-in tripod for like Zoom calls like you would a laptop, or if you want to like set it the other way around to take a selfie. Whereas the Fold 3 is a phone, it starts as a phone, but it opens up to become a tablet. So if you want to read books like a Kindle or need more screen real estate, and now it also supports the S Pen. So now you can also kind of have it like a slate and take notes with an actual pen.
So when we look at some of these devices, one question I had for you before we get into the Watch 4 is, do you think that the usage of any of these devices has changed based on this new world that we live in today, where people are kind of working differently, doing remote work, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? Do you see these as being more applicable to maybe this new remote workforce, or this way that we're working, living, and playing?
I see it across the board, also from the likes of Apple to Samsung, is you see a lot of like Zoom calls, for example. There's a lot of optimization for better video calls, whether that be better front cameras, being able to use both of these phones are great for Zoom calls. You can prop them up like you would a laptop, take calls that way. And I think also just adding to the functionality of these are, especially the Fold 3, these are not just play devices. They should also be really good work devices to get work done. And, just in case you have to take calls while, you're on a trip somewhere, if you can travel, that kind of thing.
Okay, so what about, your professional opinion? So we've got the Galaxy Flip 3, we've got the Fold 3, and now we've also got this new Watch 4. How does it stack up?
The problem, I'm an Apple Watch user, so take this with a grain of salt. But the problem with Google-based or watches that are really meant to work with Android devices, it's been neither here nor there, because for a long time, Google was, switching things around, and then Samsung tried to do their own thing with their own operating system. So now they're back with Google, working together with Google. It's powered by Wear OS. iOS, co-designed with Samsung. So all the Google Play apps are now available for the Galaxy Watch 4. It's really meant to compete with the Apple Watch, trying to be a better fitness watch. So not just a watch that shows you notifications from your phone on your wrist. There's still a lot of work to be done in this segment. They're tracking a lot of things. There's a great new sensor that can do, when you step on a scale and you get all those readings about your body mass, you can do that with your phone now. That's pretty great. The health features haven't caught up with Apple, but there are a few things it does well. Sleep tracking is one. Fitness tracking is in there. But I feel like it's not fully developed as a fitness watch just yet.
And you know what? I know we only have about 30 seconds left, but there's lots of competition in this market as well in terms of wearables. And, we're seeing more wearables that do track health and fitness data that maybe don't have the same robust screens as an Apple Watch or even the Watch 4 from Samsung. So I think it's kind of interesting to watch this space. My son has a new Fossil smartwatch that has kind of a screen almost like a Kindle. So he only has to charge it every 2 weeks. And if there's no charge, it's still a watch and it still works. So this is an exciting space to keep an eye on. And speaking of that, Michael, we do have to wrap up, but for people who want to find more information and all your awesome reviews, where's the best place for them to go?
Definitely check out all my review videos coming out this week, youtube.com/gadgetmatch. And we also have a website, gadgetmatch.com. Make it your daily habit.
Stay with us. Up next in Socially Speaking, we're going to debate whether Twitter matters at election time.
The Feed with Amber Mack and Michael B. For everything new, now, and next on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167. Socially Speaking.
A reminder that this episode of The Feed is powered by TP-Link. TP-Link routers and technology can remove wireless pain points in your home so you have better performance for working, streaming, and gaming. And speaking of gaming, the TP-Link Archer GX90 AX6600 gaming router will give gamers in your home greater capacity and low latency. Plus, the Archer GX90 is equipped with Wi-Fi 6 so that these gamers can game in the fast lane without disrupting other online activities like working and streaming. Total harmony. For gamers, that means no more lagging in the middle of a crucial shot, so their network speeds are as fast as their reaction needs. The Archer GX90 is easy to set up in just minutes with the Tether app. Should also mention that parents can control online access in that app, so if you have homework time coming up, you can pause the internet for the kids, and for more information, you can visit TP-Link online. All right. So, guys, now we're going to dive into a question that we might be talking about a lot for the next few weeks. In fact, I've booked a guest to come on the next show and speak more specifically about this. But my question for both of you, Michael and Aaron, is talking about Twitter and the impact Twitter has on elections, specifically here in Canada for our listeners. Our leaders are going to the polls in September. And I see a lot of people on Twitter getting hysterical about election information and news. I'm probably actually one of those. But nonetheless, the question is, does Twitter have an impact on elections? And I have some thoughts on this, but Michael, maybe I'll come to you first. What is your view on this, and what role does Twitter play, good or bad?
This one's a tough one because I think that no matter what the material is, they've got guidelines. And so obviously, if those guidelines, if people don't adhere to those guidelines, then appropriate action needs to be taken, regardless on whether we're talking about an election or anything else. I think that's just very straightforward. I don't think they do it as well as they should. And I don't think public opinion should weigh into any of that, because Twitter is a service. You get to choose whether to use it or not. It's free. We've talked about that on the show before. I think that is one thing I'll say. I think that when it comes to politics, most people that are on Twitter don't know how to not be emotionally driven by what they tweet. So I think that they're not very good at being unbiased and thoughtful in their responses. So I tend to find Twitter not the best place from a content perspective of where to get your information or form your feelings towards one party or another. That's probably the most diplomatic way I can say it. And I think that people are silly if they do put a lot of importance into people tweeting.
So I think that's a good point. I'll share my thoughts in a second, but Aaron, what's your opinion on this? I know that it's hard to ignore political coverage on Twitter. Do you think it kind of moves the dial at all? Does it matter? Does it make an impact?
I think it can, and I think it will. It's also very easy on Twitter to mute certain words. You can mute hashtags, mute words. I muted a lot of words from American politics over the past 4 years because I am a Canadian and I felt like it didn't apply to me. So one can willfully put blinders on, if you will, on their Twitter feed by muting words. But on the other hand, I think it can move the dial in terms of actual news. As we sit here recording, we'll see the fallout of this news story as the days go on in Ontario. I am reading a story that broke on Twitter, and by going viral, the Ontario PC Party may have contravened Elections Ontario Act, and the Liberal Party is calling on the Ontario Provincial Police Anti-Fraud Branch to investigate mailers that the Provincial PC Party mailed out to certain residents. I did not get one of these mailers, and so I would not have known about this story and possible contravening of election laws if it did not come out on Twitter and did not get brought to the opposition party's attentions via Twitter. So while there is hyperbole, there are useless memes, there are useless hashtags and mudslinging, there can be exposing of viable news stories that can affect one party or the other by election day.
I think it's a really fair point, and I will just say that we know that the Conservative Party had created sort of almost like a jib jab video where they superimpose the Prime Minister's face on a clip from Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka.
Oh, it's just so pathetic. I mean, they're really kind of, it's I mean, it's horrible.
I know,
in
but sorry,
itself.
I know we're talking about it serious. I mean, it is funny. Oompa Loompas in general, just Oompa
Sure,
Loompas
the
make me laugh.
but
So
if
I
you
know like this is a serious topic. Sorry.
Well, no, it's not even just that. It's just I actually was thinking a lot more about that specific video, and you haven't seen it. Basically, they superimpose the Prime Minister's face on the little girl in Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. So they feminized the Prime Minister, which in itself is just wrong. But
Well,
secondly,
they could have put it on a little kid that's male. I mean, there's enough movie. In fairness,
but they
could.
wouldn't,
I mean,
Michael.
there's
But
lots of naughty children.
No, but
Yeah.
that's the whole point, is that they make him seem like a little girl. So they use a little girl as an insult. And this happens in society beyond elections all the time. And why is it an insult, to use a
To
little
be
girl who's
suggested
upset?
that you're a female. Yeah.
Exactly. It is just, something people maybe don't have the depth to think about. But if you actually sort of look at that, it's okay to say you throw like a girl, like you lead like
Well,
a
it's not
girl.
okay.
No, they think
yeah.
that, right? Like that this is the
Yeah.
mindset. So, that aside, what I will just say about
But
that
very
video,
tone deaf, don't you think, for the time we're in?
100%, 100%. And if you take that video in itself and you look at that, one of my arguments that I said to a couple people on Twitter was that, yes, okay, maybe Twitter doesn't move the dial directly. You can't really measure it, but guess who's on Twitter? All media people are obsessed with Twitter. And in the past few days, that video has landed on all evening news programs, right? And Michael, you know this as well as anyone, the media is obsessed with Twitter. So stuff that happens there ends up in mainstream media in people's living rooms.
Well, and I was going to say that's also the terrifying thing. And Aaron, you pointed this out. You said when you were giving your explanation, you kept referring to what you read and got on Twitter as news, and that obviously alarms me too, right? Because there's lots of people that think anything that's tweeted like is news, and so my next thing is how many people checked who tweeted it, where it came from, what was the source? Because obviously, if I'm watching 60 Minutes on CBS, I assume because of the brand and journalism and all of that stuff, there's certain checks and balances that have happened. But when I read or see anything on Twitter, I don't automatically assume that. And so I also have a problem, and we've talked about this again a lot on the show. Lots of people get their news from Twitter. Lots of people don't check who tweeted it, where it came from, if it's true, and then they use that and then they repeat it or they retweet it. So I have a lot of problems just with social media in general as a main base for people obtaining news or fact or saying that it's fact and resharing it.
Well, I mean, I think like I get a lot of my news from Twitter from legitimate sources, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those are legitimate.
But you know what you're looking for.
100%. So it's more just, sourcing the information, and there's lots of legitimate news sources on Twitter. But you shouldn't listen to Egghead1707 who, claims to know everything. So it's a complicated space. I will just say that we just confirmed while we were recording this that Stephen Taylor, who I don't know how he would bill himself, but he definitely is a bit of a pundit, in my opinion, on politics and very savvy on social media. He's agreed to join us next episode to talk more about the impact of Twitter, and we'll continue this conversation because it's a good one. And thanks to everybody who joined us for the show. Remember, you can find us online at Amber Mac and at mbancroft80. Of course, please use the hashtag #TheFeed.
This is The Feed with Amber Mac and Michael B on SiriusXM Canada Talks, channel 167.